Hi, this is John Pettigrew, and you're listening to Talking Through My Hat, a podcast that explores bookish businesses, the fantastic people who create them, and what those people have learned. I'm a hat wearer, a recovering editor, and the creator of Futureproofs, enabling editors and authors to work better online. To find out more, visit wearefutureproofs.com or follow me on Twitter at John_Pettigrew. Welcome to this week's Talking Through My Hat. Today I'm talking with Hugh McGuire, the co-founder and executive director of the Rebus Foundation, the founder of Librivox, and the founder of Pressbooks, which helps publishers and authors easily create professionally designed print and ebook editions of their books. Before that, he worked in the world of electric power and alternative energy, but he's been trying to bring the world of the book together with the better world of the web since about 2005 now. He's particularly driven by the intersection of book publishing, open licensing, and distributed collaboration. So, welcome to the podcast, Hugh.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You've started quite a few companies over the past decade and a half. Why did you launch yourself into the world of books, and particularly books and technology, from what appears to be quite a different background?
Well, I guess I've always been, I think what I wanted to be was a Booker Award-winning novelist. That was always my ambition. And it seemed like the world of the book has always been very much close to my heart and probably the thing I'm most passionate about. But technology, and particularly the web and the idealism of the web of sort of circa 2004, when the notion that anyone could be publishing and a lot of the ideas behind Web 2.0 came along, I found that very philosophically exciting as well. And I discovered things like open source software, and I guess those things just kind of came together, and I started doing various projects here and there, and then started Librivox, and that kind of took on a life of its own. And since then, I've been just chasing these ideas that I seem to be driven by. And, everything has been, I think, certainly on the edge of, or the far edge of mainstream publishing, but I'm very interested in the ways that new models of publishing can be developed. And that's just something that I've, I guess the success of Librivox has sort of intoxicated me with this idea that the web could drive different models of engagement with creating and reading. And so I've just been excited by that for, I guess it's, coming on 15 years now.
Yeah. So thinking about Librivox, what was it that made you actually found a business? You had a job, and then suddenly you were founding a business doing this mad stuff.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, Librivox, you said lots of companies. In fact, a lot of the stuff that I've done has been not a company. Librivox, in fact, it's completely nonprofit. Basically, it lives under the Internet Archive now. It was started just as a project, I would say in my basement. It wasn't exactly my basement, but and it, as I say, took on a life of its own, but it actually has no revenue streams. We barely raise money ever. And it just exists on its own. And I think, I guess I'm an idealistic. I think that the ideas of the web around that time, that there was kind of this socialisty utopian view of how the web could change the world. It's obviously done lots of different kinds of things, but I think I'm driven by these notions of the ways in which people can interact in streams that aren't economic. So while I have started a number of companies, a lot of the work that I've done has been more in the nonprofit realm, or sort of skating between those two worlds. And that's to some degree true of Pressbooks, certainly true. Rebus is a nonprofit, Pressbooks is for-profit. They kind of work together in tandem. I'm on the very far edges. I'm certainly not competing with Jeff Bezos for the success in the book world of business, but have found ways to continue pursuing these things that excite me through a variety of nonprofit and for-profit enterprises. So.
Yeah, so all the things that you're doing now, things like Rebus and Pressbook and so forth. How would you describe each of those? What is the? Because obviously they're doing different things, or you wouldn't have different things.
Yeah, so I think it all comes out from me comes from what happened with Librivox, and what was exciting about that was, with the set of relatively easy to use tools, and the ability of the web to connect people, and the ability of the web to publish things essentially for free, that set of things combined to create this wonderful project. And for those who don't know about Librivox, it's a global network of volunteers around the world who make audio recordings of public domain books and give them away for free on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
It's all run completely on a volunteer basis with a distributed group of people all over the world who found kind of process and way to collaborate on making these free public domain audiobooks and giving them away.
Yeah.
So that has kind of been the founding model in my mind for how the web can do different kinds of exciting things. And what's exciting to me about that is that, as you said in the introduction, it's kind of this connection between books as sort of a unifying idea or unifying central thing that brings us together. And then the ways in which we can build this distributed type of collaboration where people can do little bits of work on projects and then have that contribute to a whole. So in the case of Librivox, we started where just different people would volunteer for different chapters of a particular book. And we started, doing Jack London's small books and Call of the Wild and some Joseph Conrad, so public domain books. Mm-hmm. Different people would contribute chapters, and then it evolved a little bit. And then it turns out that the project still works like that, but now half the books that are produced, someone just records the whole thing on their own and gives it away. And it was just so exciting to me that you could put a process in place with a space for people to communicate and connect, and a set of relatively easy to use tools, and have something like Librivox flower. And that's published, I think it would be close to 12,000 audiobooks over the past decade.
That's awesome.
And which have been downloaded hundreds of millions of, it's probably billions of times now. Actually, I haven't checked for ages because we don't care about stuff like that. But that to me was just an example of this small corner of the internet where this group of people work together to do something wonderful because they love books. And so when I look at the other things I've done, Pressbooks was really an effort to try to make a book creation platform that could help drive similar models. And then Rebus really is about, so there's two parts of Rebus as well, but one part of it is helping to build out the communities that could be using Pressbooks to be making open textbooks in particular. So we're focused on the education market. And then the other part of that was just in Rebus, there's also another project to develop an open source ebook reading platform has open APIs and based on the open web. And that really just comes from the frustration of how our reading activity, which is a fundamental, probably the core intellectual activity of our lives, and digital could be doing a lot more, but all of our digital reading is mostly locked up in proprietary platforms where we can't think about innovating on that experience unless Amazon or Kobo or whoever it is wants us to be able to do that, which they generally don't. So, so I think the unifying notion is this idea of the book as the central object that brings people together, to have a mechanism for people to be working together in new kinds of collaborative ways, and then the tools to help do the work, whatever that is. And in case of Pressbooks, it's publishing the book itself.
Yeah. So you've described a very idealistic movement, something that's driven by a philosophy of life and how the world should be, and pushing that agenda forward, which is obviously fantastic. How did you find yourself running a for-profit business with Pressbooks then?
Right. So Pressbooks is software that helps people make books. For a long time, so originally the notion was this would be a tool that would enable different models of book publishing to evolve. The first set of users of Pressbooks were largely self-published authors who wanted print and ebook versions of their books. We had some small presses. We had one academic press in the very first year of commercial operation. I thought, great, all of the academic presses in the world will join on board because this makes so much sense and it's going to be cheaper and easier for them. And it turned out that wasn't the case. The change in approach was just too radical for just everyone. But what ended up happening, there was a small business around self-published authors and very small presses that were using Pressbooks, and we charged for using the software. It is open source, so you can download the software for free. But most people just want to pay a bit of money to have access to the software online. And then what's evolved in the last couple of years, and sort of in parallel with establishing of Rebus, was that there's a big movement, particularly in the United States and Canada, around open educational resources or free open source textbooks. And Pressbooks has become the platform of choice for creating those textbooks. So our clients generally are educational institutions, often academic libraries, who are supporting publishing of various kinds within their institutions. And we charge money and host the platform for them and train them and provide support. So that's how that business evolved.
I'm interested in that philosophical shift from Librivox, which is entirely volunteer run, to something that is a commercial entity. And obviously, initially there was, as you say, there's open source software anyone can download and use, but you're running a business on top of that.
Yeah, so that's a standard model for open source software. Yeah. So there is, and I was never with Pressbooks. The intention from the beginning, it was open source for lots of probably idealistic kinds of reasons, but the intention always was to have a business that could be sustainable on top of that. So, I think the notion of going and finding grant funding all the time it's much preferable to have clients who are happy with what you're producing and are willing to pay you for it. So there wasn't really that big of a jump for me.
Okay.
It was more, is this going to work as a business was the question. I didn't really have any, and I still don't have, I don't have any, there are lots of ways in which commercial entities help idealistic activities in lots of different ways. And so I don't see any distinction. What I'm interested in, though, is how can a lower cost mechanism publishing, which Pressbooks certainly is, enable lower cost and easier to use and more accessible? How can that enable new models to develop? So that's the piece that was interesting. My motivation has always been about how can we use the new technologies of the web to drive people to do things that are artistically or creatively fulfilling to them, and particularly in the book world. And that's the thing that interests me. That notion. We have a funny thing, a sort of notion in Librivox, which I used to say quite a bit, is that in some sense the biggest value that Librivox provides is a space for people who want to make and give away audiobooks. And the fact that the world happens to get a free library of public domain audiobooks is kind of this great fringe benefit for what we're actually trying to do, which is to support people who want to make the books. Okay. And I think that notion that I have, that creating something, sharing it, and working together with other people are sort of these fundamentally richly rewarding human activities, that's what drives me, certainly much more than money. But you do want to be able to keep doing what you're doing, and so getting people to pay for things somehow or other is part
often helpful.
Yeah.
And as you run, as you say, Librivox started off and has developed, and Pressbooks has kind of maybe head in a slightly different direction than it originally thought. I mean, have you found that things have gone in the directions you expect? I mean, did you know where you were going when you set up these things, and have they gone where you thought, or have you found yourself often taking roads that you just didn't anticipate?
I think actually, when I think back to it, it's not so much that I've taken roads that I didn't anticipate, but the publishing industry did not evolve at all as I expected at all. So,
Fair enough.
I used to give talks about how the web was going to totally transform books and the publishing industry. And what has happened, I think, is that has sort of happened, but just totally outside of the publishing industry itself. Mm-hmm. The publishing industry generally has remained, let's say, actively hostile to digital in most cases, certainly trade publishing. And so I thought there was going to be a bigger impact on the way the traditional publishing industry operated. Uh-huh. And there hasn't been nearly that kind of impact, I don't think. So my biggest surprise was how little change happened. I mean, it's not that there hasn't been change, but how little fundamental change happened within the traditional publishing industry. It's a bit different in the educational publishing, where, in fact, actually these impacts are getting bigger and companies are changing their whole business models partly because of the kinds of things that we're working on in open textbooks, where the textbooks companies are seeing the selling units of content no longer being a viable long-term strategy, because they see that the content itself is increasingly going to be available and as licensed stuff. So they're moving more towards building homework platforms, et cetera, on top of existing content.
Yeah.
So what was your question? I've sort of stuck to this road with a probably stubbornness that was not justified. But finally, really, with the open textbook and open education movement, there was a space where a lot of the stuff that I wanted to see happen got embraced by a community and sort of let's say a market that actually wanted the kinds of things that I'm interested in around books. And I had to wait longer than I had hoped for that community to evolve and to sort of be present there.
But you have found that, and that's now a good match for what you wanted and where you want to be going. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's those who are involved in that movement, kind of this notion that educational content should be accessible and free, and that the way the textbook world and the academic publishing world is organized doesn't make an awful lot of sense. There's a lot of people who feel that way, and again, it just took a while for that to emerge as a viable place for the work that I was hoping to do. But yes, happy to have found finally the right community that matches with my sort of hopes for what publishing can look like.
Yeah, that's great. So it must be interesting running not only several organizations, several very different organizations. And again, it's always interesting to me when you start off trying to run a business, run an organization. It's very different from working in one. And how did you kind of, when you set up Librivox, how did you set out learning how to do that, how to run it? And when as you've gone on, how have you learned to do it better?
That's a good question. So Librivox was a magical thing, really, frankly. It was, again, I think at the time there was so much idealism around, so it struck a chord with a lot of people who were looking at the web in that idealistic way, this weird community of people who wanted to read audiobooks, which is this funny community and lovely community. I think I was so suited to that time and place. I was so passionate about the ways in which we could try to rebuild a new and different world on the web. And Librivox, in a way, again, was so magical because what happened was I had sort of this vision of what it could be, and just these people emerged, all these volunteers from around the world just emerged. Whenever we had a problem, someone would emerge, say, oh, here's a solution for it. And so I sort of, I guess from them, have this very flawed idea of how problems just get solved magically by people who appear.
Yeah.
And so I think it's been a challenge to go from that very organic and wonderful experience of Librivox that just worked, and it was just the right moment and the right time, and maybe I expressed things in a way that just resonated with people at the right time, and the way we built that community, just everything just seemed to click into place with Librivox. And then I guess it's been to some degree a struggle to try to do things to recreate the kinds of things we had there, and learn how to be hiring people and trying to get groups working together where they're paid to do it rather than doing it just because they're passionate about the thing. And people I work with are also passionate about the thing, but the sort of magical thing that happened with Librivox, trying to recreate that notion of creating a framework to let people do the things they're most passionate about and drive sort of a vision forward has been fun and challenging, and I continue to learn how to do that better. But for for a number of years, it was my company, as it were, was me with a couple of part-time developers, and it's really only in the last since started Rebus that now we're a team. I think overall if I look at not including all the thousands of work on Librivox, but we're about 15 now or something like that. So it's not a huge enterprise, but it's a lot of people and managing things like client expectations or delivering software on time and things that in LibriVox, if it was late, it was late. It didn't really matter. So how I've learned is it more a question of have I learned well enough? It's a constant battle, and you read about management and how to get teams inspired and how to organize them. And I seem like every year every month there's new problems that you have to solve, and you just find your way through it. So.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like Librivox became almost the ideal free open source community.
For me, certainly it did, yeah.
Yeah, and where there is that mutuality and sense of common purpose.
Yeah. As I say, it was just a magic time and moment. And I think, when I think about, I like thinking and talking and writing, and so much of how LibriVox evolved was through this, I guess, kind of interplay of conversation between me and lots of other people about what world. I mean, really, it was like, what world do we want to live in, and how do we build this new space on the internet for a world we wanted? And that's what LibriVox ended up being, was a place where it's a remarkably, and remains to this day, a remarkably civil and wonderful community. People are supportive and helpful, and we had a very strict policies around people being mean and. So we just didn't have any of those internet trolling and all that other kind of stuff. We just sort of stamped it out early and built up a culture.
But it's very important to do that. If you look at the fuss in so many places at the moment about simply getting basic codes of conduct in place, and getting that in early and established is part of setting up the culture of the place. And that's something I think, by the sound of it, you got right at the start.
Right, and it's, LibriVox is not millions of people, but certainly, at that time, I mean, I was heavily inspired by Wikipedia, for instance, and every once in a while I would wade into Wikipedia, and Wikipedia is just like a mess of acrimony. I mean, it's a wonderful project, but if you look behind the curtain of how things happen there's just so much acrimony and fights, and everything is so contentious there, and I would always come back to LibriVox and go, gosh, it's so nice to be here where everyone is just supportive and agreeable, and a lot of that was the kind of place that I wanted to spend my time when LibriVox was starting to evolve, and that means that the people who ended up sticking around with the project were similarly inclined, and I think and then that culture just kind of gets built in, and then it just sort of propagates itself forward.
So I mean, with organizations that are so visionary, so led by a vision, an ideal, a purpose. When you think about kind of, for LibriVox and for Pressbooks and Rebus, when you think about the next 5 years or 15 years or 50 years, what sorts of things are you thinking about to make sure that they're still around and relevant in those longer term time frames?
Well, it's funny with, again, I'll just go back to LibriVox. It was kind of a joke, but it wasn't a joke. It was we have a 1,000-year timeline for achieving our goal, which is making every public domain book available in audio version. So every public domain book that exists in the world in every language available for free in audio. And so we had a 1,000-year timeline. That was kind of a joke, but it's also kind of true. So I guess I would say for LibriVox in particular, I hope it continues on, and the indications are that it will.
I mean, it's got an eternal mission, as you say, almost, because every year that passes, new works enter the public domain. So it's, in a sense, its job will never be done.
Yeah, and it's funny. I guess I haven't really thought about that question. But with LibriVox, it's really, did we build a culture that's strong enough and sustainable enough to evolve in the way that it needs to?
Okay.
And I don't think there's more that can be done than that.
Okay.
And I think, articulating a vision that people can get behind and get excited about, that is, as you say, there's kind of an eternality to that vision. And not everyone agrees with it. There are lots of people who think it's nuts or stupid or crazy. But those who do... That's
the nature of vision.
Exactly. And if we can inspire enough people to do the work to make this thing sustainable in the long run, then it shall be. And that's the challenge that we have.
And for you personally, as you're running these organizations and trying to make sure that these visions kind of come about and just the day-to-day stuff happens, what is it that's hardest for you about running these things, keeping them going?
Yeah, it's the day-to-day stuff, I think, that's the hardest. I think so again, LibriVox is this magical thing that doesn't actually need any money. partially because it's sort of under the wings of Internet Archive for the hard cost, which is just hosting audio, but the rest just kind of runs on its own. I think my biggest worry for Pressbooks and what we're trying to build in Rebus is making sure that the resources and funds are there to keep things going. And so that's probably the biggest existential worry that is always around there. I think personally, I find the nitty-gritty of operations the hardest piece, and we're not quite big enough to have someone else take care of all that yet. And trying to make sure that the people who are doing the work believe in the vision, believe that we've got the right approach to it. And then that ends up coming down to a lot of operational stuff. People can believe in the vision, but making sure that the tools are in place for people who are working with me to do what they need to do in a way that keeps them happy and excited. So that again is a challenge. And part of that is hiring people who are good at doing that kind of stuff. Yeah. And this was the reflection in Librivox, where what ended up happening was the emergence of the people who said, "Oh, I understand what you're trying to do here. What do you think about this?" And I would say, "That sounds great." And then they would just go and do it. And that, that's my model of the world, is just magic. Someone appears who's really good at doing the thing that needs to be done and does it. And everyone goes, "Great, good, move forward."
Oh, well. And clearly you're someone who's driven by vision, who has these big ideas and shoots for them. But what have you learned about yourself in the process of doing that?
Well, I think it goes back to that. It's one thing to have the vision, and in the startup world, there's a saying, ideas are a dime a dozen. It's you can sit down and come up with a bunch of great ideas over 6 great ideas over lunch, and it's execution. I think that's the hardest part for me is making sure that execution happens. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned really, and I recognized it very early in let's say Librivox, is that the way that has to happen is having the right people around me who can. I'm pretty good at the vision stuff. Pretty good at seeing how execution ought to happen, and then it's the next level down, or not next level down, that next level of actually getting the thing to be done properly, where my skill set starts to be a little bit less effective. So learning about the absolute critical importance of having the right people around who are good at executing, and who I can trust and work with, and that kind of thing. So that's the most important thing for me.
And then what is it then that, if the day-to-day stuff is what's hard at Pressbooks and Rebus and stuff, what is it that keeps you coming back to it every day?
Oh, I love talking about this stuff. I love dreaming about it. I mean, I don't want to give up on the idealism that I felt, 10, 12, 13 years ago when I discovered this stuff, and so much that's happened in the world. One's idealism is under a lot of pressure these days from so many different places, partly how the web evolved. And, but I think, what drives me is the same belief that this kind of notion of creation and collaboration being the most important fundamental human activities, and the ways in which I can help that happen in a model that's outside of the hardcore capitalism that is just something I've never been driven by. That notion is so exciting to me, and I love talking about it, and I love talking about it to people who get excited about it, and that's what brings me back, is just the belief that these visions of idealism, that we can do something, that we can have spaces where these ideas don't have to go away and wither, and that we can still build communities and spaces for idealism, and that the web is still a wonderful place to do that, regardless of what else happens in the world and on the web.
That's great. A meta vision to end on. That's fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time, Hugh. It's been brilliant.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for contacting me, and I really enjoyed the talk.
This was Talking Through My Hat, a podcast by John Pettigrew, founder of We Are Futureproofs. Please let me know your thoughts by leaving a review at Apple Podcasts, or by commenting on the website myhat.wearefutureproofs.com. You can subscribe to this channel at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme music is from hooksounds.com.